The wind did not merely blow across the high plains of the Dakota Territory in the late 1880s. It scoured. It carried the grit of 1,000 miles of empty earth, stinging the eyes and coating the teeth with the taste of ancient dust. On the edge of the railroad town of Iron Creek, the wind rattled the loose clapboards of the livery stable and whipped the canvas awnings of the mercantile until they snapped like gunshots. The air smelled of coal smoke from the idling locomotive, the acrid stench of unwashed bodies, and the dry, metallic scent of desperate poverty. To Anna, standing on a makeshift wooden platform behind the Golden Steer Saloon, the wind felt like a physical assault, yet it was the least of her terrors. She was 22 years old, though the hollows beneath her cheekbones and the rough, red chafing of her hands made her look older. Her calico dress, once a cheerful blue, had faded to the color of a bruised sky and hung loosely on her frame. In her arms, wrapped in a blanket that was little more than a gray rag, she clutched her 7-month-old son, Sam. The baby was sleeping, a small mercy that Anna prayed would last. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, trying to shield his small face from the dust swirling in the yard. Around her, 4 other women stood in a line, their heads bowed, their eyes fixed on the trampled mud of the corral. They were the discarded things of the frontier, widows with debt, women who had fallen from grace, or those who had simply been dragged here by men who saw them as currency. A man named Vance paced in front of them. He was a thick-necked man with a bowler hat that seemed too small for his head and a vest stained with tobacco juice. He held a piece of paper in one hand and a riding crop in the other, tapping it rhythmically against his thigh. "Step up, ladies, step up," Vance shouted, his voice booming over the low murmur of the crowd that had gathered. "This ain't a funeral. Look alive. We have fine stock here today. Cooks, cleaners, warmers for a cold night. All debts are transferable. You pay the debt, you take the woman. It is simple business." Anna squeezed her eyes shut. The memory of how she came to be here rose like bile in her throat. It had been less than a year since Thomas had died, shot down in a senseless argument over a card game he hadn't even been playing. He had left her nothing but a leaky roof and a pile of promissory notes held by Vance. She remembered the day Vance had come to her door. 2 weeks ago. He had not asked for the money. He knew she didn't have it. He had simply told her that her time was up. He had taken her skillet, her wedding ring, and then he had taken her. He had dragged her onto a wagon, telling her she would work off what she owed, one way or another. She had thought he meant scrubbing floors in his saloon. She had not realized until this morning that he intended to sell her contract to the highest bidder in a yard full of strangers. "Look at this one," Vance said, stopping in front of Anna. He reached out and grabbed her chin with rough, calloused fingers, forcing her face up. Young, strong teeth, a bit thin, but nothing a sack of flour won't fix. Anna pulled her face away, clutching Sam tighter. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd of men. There were 30 or 40 of them, ranch hands smelling of horses, miners with coal dust in their creases, and shopkeepers looking for cheap labor. They looked at her not as a person, but as they would look at a heifer at the county fair, judging her hips and her stamina. "She comes with baggage. Though," a voice called out from the front. A tall, jagged man with a long duster coat spat on the ground. "I ain't looking to feed another man's pup." Vance laughed, a dry, barking sound. "The brat? No extra charge for the brat. Or, if you are of a mind, you can leave him at the church steps. The sisters will take anything." Anna's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She pressed her cheek to the top of Sam's head, smelling the milk and sleep on him. "They will not take you," she thought fiercely, though her knees trembled. "I will die before I let them take you." On the periphery of the crowd, leaning against a railing that separated the auction yard from the street, a man watched in silence. He stood apart from the others, not just in distance but in demeanor. He wore a canvas coat that had been patched at the elbow and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. He was a cowboy. That much was clear from the worn leather of his chaps and the way he rested his weight on one leg, favoring the left. His name was Luke. He was 30 years old. though the sun and wind had etched lines around his eyes that belonged to a man of 50. A thin, pale scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into the collar of his shirt. He had come to town for supplies, nails, flour, and coffee, and had found himself drawn to the noise behind the saloon against his better judgment. He hated this. He hated the noise, the smell of cheap whiskey, and the casual cruelty of the men laughing at the women on the planks. It reminded him of things he had spent 10 years trying to forget. He shifted, pain radiating up his bad leg, and prepared to turn away. He needed a housekeeper. True enough. The ranch was falling into disarray while he worked the cattle, and the silence of the cabin was enough to drive a man mad in the winter. But he could not bring himself to participate in this flesh market. Then he heard the auctioneer speak about the baby. He looked up and saw the woman in the faded blue dress. He saw the way she curled her body around the bundle in her arms, shielding it with a ferocity that made her seem larger than her starving frame. He saw her eyes, wide, terrified, but burning with a desperate defiance. The image struck him with the force of a physical blow. It was not just a woman and a child. It was a memory. He saw smoke. He saw a burning homestead. He saw his younger brother, small and helpless, and the crushing weight of his own failure to save him. The old guilt, never fully asleep, woke up and roared in his chest. $10 for the contract, Vance shouted. Do I hear $10? She can cook, she can sew, and she knows her place. 12, a man shouted. 15, said the man in the duster coat. He was grinning, his eyes fixed on Anna's chest. Luke's hand clenched into a fist at his side. He touched the small pouch of coins in his pocket. It was the money for the winter supplies. It was the money for a new plow blade. It was everything he had scraped together from selling off the last of the year's steers. $20, the man in the duster said. And I'll drop the brat at the orphanage on the way home. Save the feed. The crowd laughed again. Anna let out a small, strangled sound, a sob that she choked back instantly. Luke pushed off the railing. He did not shout. His voice was low, a deep rumble that somehow cut through the jeering laughter. $50. The silence that followed was instant. Heads turned. Men squinted against the sun to see who had spoken. $50 was a month's wages for a top hand. It was a fortune for a debt contract. Vance blinked, surprised. He looked at Luke, licking his lips greedily. The gentleman in the back bids $50. Do I hear 55? The man in the duster, whose name was Caleb, turned to glare at Luke. He was a wealthy rancher, known for running his horses into the ground and his men even harder. He did not like to be outdone by a drifter with a limp. 55, Caleb spat. Luke did not hesitate. 60. Caleb narrowed his eyes. She ain't worth 60. Look at her. She'll break in a week. Then let me waste my money, Luke said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, but his eyes were hard as flint. 70, Caleb challenged, stepping forward. He wanted to see the stranger fold. Luke felt the sweat trickling down his back. $70 would leave him with almost nothing. He would be eating beans and boiled water until spring. He looked at Anna again. She was watching him, her face pale as milk, waiting to see which wolf would claim her. $100, Luke said. A gasp went through the yard. Vance looked as if he might weep with joy. Caleb's face turned a mottled red. He opened his mouth, looked at Anna, then looked back at Luke. He scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. Keep her, Caleb sneered. And the brat? I can buy 3 healthy ones for that price in St. Louis, you're a fool. Stranger, soft in the head. Caleb turned and shoved his way out of the crowd. Vance slammed his riding crop against the railing. Sold. Sold to the man in the back for $100. Step up, sir. Step up and claim your property. Anna felt the world tilt. $100. The sum was astronomical. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her exhaustion. A man did not pay $100 for a housekeeper. A man paid $100 for something he intended to own completely, body and soul. She looked at Luke as he walked toward the platform. He was big, broad-shouldered, with a scar that suggested violence. She gripped Sam so tight the baby stirred and let out a soft whimper. She braced herself. She expected him to grab her arm. She expected him to check her teeth or look her over as Vance had done. She prepared herself to fight, to bite, to scratch, even if it meant a beating. Luke stopped at the edge of the platform. He did not step up onto it. He did not reach for her. He took off his hat, revealing dark hair matted with sweat, and held it against his chest. He looked at Vance. "Here's your money," Luke said, handing over the pouch of coins. "Give me the paper." Vance counted the coins quickly, his fingers trembling with greed. He handed a crumpled document to Luke. "She's all yours." "Friend, good luck with the crying." Luke ignored him. He turned his gaze to Anna. He did not look at her body. He looked her in the eyes. He saw the terror there, the way she was vibrating with the need to flee. He stepped closer, but not too close. He kept the wooden railing between them. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was rough, unused to soft words. Anna flinched. "Yes, sir," she whispered, her voice cracking. Luke looked down at the dusty planks, then back up at her. He seemed to be struggling with the words, chewing on them before he let them out. He lowered his voice so that the men lingering nearby could not hear. It was a whisper, grave and serious. "My name is Luke. I have a place about 4 hours' ride from here. It is quiet." Anna stared at him, her breath hitching. Luke looked at the baby, his expression softening into something that looked like pain. "I ain't looking for a slave, ma'am, and I ain't looking for a whore." The word hung in the air between them. Anna felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I bought the paper to get you off this stage," Luke said, his voice dropping even lower. Intense and urgent. "You come with me. I will give you a roof and food. I will be father to the boy and husband to you, if you'll let me. To the world. That is what we are. It's the only way you'll be safe out here." He paused, his eyes searching hers, desperate for her to understand. "But I give you my word, on my mother's grave, I will not touch you without your say-so. You sleep in the bed. I sleep in the barn if I have to. You are not property. Do you understand?" Anna was stunned. The world had stopped spinning. She looked for the lie in his face. She looked for the cruelty she had come to expect from men. She saw only a profound, weary sadness and a rigid kind of honor. I don't," she stammered. Luke gestured to the wagon parked near the livery. "Get your things. Let's get the boy out of this wind." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked toward the wagon, his limp more pronounced now that the adrenaline was fading. Anna stood frozen for a heartbeat. Then, realizing she had no other choice, and clutching the fragile hope his whisper had ignited, she stepped down from the platform. She gathered her small bundle, a single carpet bag containing 2 shirts, a broken comb, and Sam's few clouts. She followed him. The walk to the wagon was a gauntlet. The townspeople were watching. 2 women in fine bonnets standing outside the dry goods store turned their heads as Anna passed, whispering behind their gloved hands. "Bought himself a strumpet," one muttered loud enough for Anna to hear. "With a bastard child," the other replied. "Shameful." Anna kept her head down, staring at the heels of Luke's boots. She felt the shame burning her skin like a brand. "Let them talk," she told herself. "Let them talk if it means Sam gets to eat." Luke reached the wagon, a buckboard that had seen better days, hitched to 2 steady-looking roan horses. He didn't grab her waist to hoist her up. Instead, he offered a hand, palm up, waiting. Anna hesitated, then placed her hand in his. His grip was firm and dry, calloused but gentle. He helped her up to the bench seat, then handed her the carpet bag. He checked the horses, adjusting a strap on the harness, giving her a moment to settle before he climbed up beside her. He snapped the reins. "Walk on." The wagon lurched forward. They rolled past the saloon, past the staring men, past the judgment of the church ladies, and out onto the open road. As the town of Iron Creek faded behind them, the silence of the high plains descended. It was a massive, crushing silence. The land stretched out in every direction, a sea of brown and gold grass under a vast, indifferent dome of blue. There were no trees, only the endless undulating earth. The journey was grueling. The wagon had no springs to speak of, and every rut in the hard-packed trail sent a jolt through Anna's spine. She sat rigid, her arms locked around Sam, absorbing the shocks so he wouldn't wake. The wind did not let up. It hissed through the grass and buffeted the wagon, drying Anna's lips until they cracked. Luke sat beside her, slouching slightly, his hat pulled low against the glare of the setting sun. He did not speak. He seemed to be wrestling with his own thoughts, his jaw set tight. Every now and then, he would glance at the horizon, checking the weather, then glance quickly at her before looking away. Anna's mind raced. Father and husband. He had said it was a madness. Why would a man pay everything he had for a stranger? Was he lonely? Was he crazy? Or was he playing a long game, waiting until they were miles from civilization to show his true nature? She moved an inch further away from him on the bench, clutching the hidden sharp rock she had tucked into her pocket days ago. Hours passed. The sun began to dip below the rim of the world, painting the sky in violent streaks of bruised purple and bleeding orange. The temperature plummeted. The heat of the day evaporated instantly, replaced by a biting chill that cut through Anna's thin dress. Luke slowed the horses as they approached a shallow depression in the land where a narrow creek cut through the dust. A few scrubby cottonwoods clung to the bank, offering meager shelter. "We'll camp here," Luke said. His voice sounded loud in the quiet. "Horses need water." He halted the wagon and set the brake. Anna remained frozen on the seat. "You can get down," Luke said gently. "Stretch your legs." Anna climbed down awkwardly, her legs stiff. Sam began to stir. The motion of the wagon had kept him asleep, but the stillness woke him. He let out a fussing, whimpering sound that quickly escalated into a hungry cry. Anna panicked. She bounced him in her arms. "Shh, Sam, shh, please." She felt Luke watching her, the shame of her inability to soothe the child. The fear that the crying would anger him made her hands shake. She turned her back to Luke, unbuttoning the top of her dress with fumbling, frozen fingers to offer Sam her breast. Luke turned away immediately. "I'll get a fire started," he said, moving toward the cottonwoods. Anna sat on a flat rock near the creek, feeding the baby. The wind bit at her exposed skin. She watched Luke work. He moved with a quiet efficiency. He gathered dried buffalo chips and deadfall branches. He struck a match, cupping his large hands around the flame until it caught. Soon, a small fire was crackling, pushing back the encroaching dark. The smell of burning sagebrush was sharp and clean. Luke walked back to the wagon and pulled a bedroll and a heavy woolen coat from the back. He approached Anna. She stiffened, pulling Sam closer. Luke stopped 5 feet away. He held out the coat. "It's getting cold," he said. Anna looked at the coat, then at his face. The firelight flickered in his eyes. There was no lust there, no anger, just a simple offering. "Take it," he said. "You're shivering." Anna reached out one hand and took the heavy wool. It was warm from where it had been sitting in the sun. She draped it over her shoulders, pulling it around Sam as well. The warmth was instant and overwhelming. "Thank you," she whispered. Luke nodded once. He went back to the fire and sat on the ground, placing his hat beside him. He took a piece of dried beef and a biscuit from his saddlebag and held it out to her. "Eat." Anna hesitated, then moved closer to the fire, though she kept a safe distance from him. She took the food. She hadn't eaten since the morning before. She ate quickly, wolves tearing at her hunger. Luke watched the fire. He poured water from a canteen into a tin cup and set it near the flames to warm. "Why?" Anna asked. The word slipped out before she could stop it. Luke looked up. "Why what? Why did you do it? You spent everything." Luke picked up a stick and poked at the fire. Sparks swirled up into the darkening sky. A coyote howled in the distance, a lonely, yipping sound that made the emptiness of the plains feel infinite. He didn't look at her when he answered. "I had a brother," he said quietly, "a long time ago." He didn't say more. He didn't explain. But the tone of his voice carried a weight that Anna understood. It was the weight of a loss. He looked at her then, meeting her gaze across the flames. "You ain't a slave, Anna, and that boy ain't an orphan. As long as you're on my land, you're folks." He stood up, groaning slightly as his bad leg straightened. He gestured to the bedroll he had laid out near the fire, on the side sheltered from the wind by the wagon. "You sleep there. I'll sleep by the wheel." He walked into the darkness to check the horses for the night. Anna sat by the fire, wrapped in the stranger's coat, her belly full for the first time in weeks. She looked at the bedroll. She looked at the silhouette of the man moving in the dark. She touched the top of Sam's head. The fear was still there, coiled in her gut like a snake, but as she watched the sparks rise toward the stars, she felt something else. Too, a confusion, a question. Father and husband. He had whispered. She pulled the coat tighter. It smelled of tobacco, horse sweat, and rain. It smelled like safety. For tonight, just for tonight, she would let herself believe him. The wagon wheels groaned over the final rise, revealing the homestead that Luke called home. To Anna, looking out from beneath the brim of the borrowed hat Luke had given her, it looked like a shipwreck stranded in a sea of brown grass. The house was a modest structure of rough-hewn logs, chinked with mud that had dried and cracked in the relentless sun. A lean-to porch sagged slightly on the western side, shading a front door that had been scoured gray by the wind. Beyond the cabin stood a barn that had seen better decades, its roof patched with mismatched shingles, a corral fence, listing in places but sturdy enough to hold stock, enclosed 3 horses that lifted their heads to watch the wagon approach. To the north, a solitary, skeletal cottonwood tree clawed at the sky, its branches mostly bare, a testament to the lack of water in this unforgiving country. It was desolate. It was silent. Anna felt a cold stone settle in the pit of her stomach. During the long ride from Iron Creek, a small part of her had hoped for neighbors, for a ranch hand, for another woman, anyone who might serve as a buffer between her and this stranger. But there was nothing here but the wind and the horizon. If Luke decided to be cruel, if the kindness he had shown on the trail was a mask, there was nowhere to run. Her scream would die in the empty air long before it reached a human ear. Luke pulled back on the reins, bringing the horses to a halt near the porch. He set the brake and wrapped the leather leads around the handle, then turned to look at her. He seemed to sense her apprehension. He took off his hat and wiped the dust from his forehead with his sleeve. "It is not much," Luke said, his voice low. "The drought has been hard on the land this year, but the roof holds against the rain, and the stove draws well." Anna nodded, clutching Sam to her chest. "It is fine," she said, though her voice was barely a whisper. Luke climbed down, his boots crunching on the dry earth. He walked around the wagon and reached up to help her down. For a second, she hesitated, looking at his hands. Large, scarred, capable of violence. Then she remembered the coat he had given her, and the food he had shared. She placed her hand in his. He took her weight easily, setting her on the ground with a gentleness that seemed at odds with the roughness of his surroundings. "Go on inside," Luke said, gesturing to the door. "I will see to the horses and bring in your things." Anna walked up the 2 wooden steps and pushed open the door. The hinges creaked, a lonely sound. She stepped across the threshold and stopped. The interior was stark, but surprisingly clean. A single room served as kitchen, parlor, and bedroom. To her left, a cast-iron stove sat cold and black, with a wood box neatly stacked beside it. A table made of thick pine planks dominated the center of the room, flanked by 2 chairs. On the far wall, shelves held a row of tin cans, a sack of flour, and a few leather-bound books that looked well-read. In the corner stood a narrow bed with a wrought iron frame, covered by a faded quilt. It was the only bed in the room. Anna stood in the center of the floor, feeling like an intruder. The air inside smelled of stale coffee, wood smoke, and the absence of life. It was a bachelor's house, functional and devoid of softness. The door opened behind her, and Luke entered, carrying her small carpet bag and a box of supplies he had bought in town. He set the box on the table and the bag on the floor. He looked at the bed, then at Anna, and a flush of color rose in his neck, visible even through his tan. He cleared his throat, shifting his weight to his good leg. About the sleeping, he began, rubbing the back of his neck. That there is the only bed. You and the boy take it. Anna looked at him, her eyes widening. But where will you sleep? Luke pointed to a rolled-up pallet of blankets in the corner near the hearth. The floor is sturdy enough. I have slept on harder ground than pine boards. In the summer, I might sleep in the barn loft, but with the nights turning cold, I reckon I will stay near the fire. He looked down at his boots, struggling with the words. I meant what I said. Anna, you take the bed. You lock the door when you change, if it makes you feel easier. I will knock before I come in from chores. Anna stared at him. She had spent the last 2 years in a world where men took the best for themselves and left the scraps for women like her. To be offered the only bed, to be offered privacy, felt like a foreign language. Thank you, she said softly. Luke nodded sharply, seemingly eager to end the awkward moment. I will get a fire going. There is salt pork and beans for supper. It is not fancy, but it fills the belly. That first evening set the rhythm for the days that followed. They moved around each other like ghosts in a small room, polite but distant, over a dinner of stew that Anna insisted on cooking, her first act of claiming some utility in this strange arrangement. Luke finally spoke of the elephant in the room. The lantern light cast long, dancing shadows against the log walls. Sam was asleep on the bed, barricaded by pillows. Luke sat at the table, his hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee. I want you to know something, Luke said, staring into the dark liquid. Anna looked up from her mending. The silence of the prairie outside was so heavy it pressed against the window panes. Yes, the paper, Luke said. The contract I bought from Vance. Anna flinched at the name. Luke saw it and his jaw tightened. I did not buy it because I wanted to own a person. I bought it because it was the only law that man respected. If I had tried to just take you away, he would have sent the sheriff after us for theft. He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. His gaze was intense, burning with a quiet sincerity. You are here because you choose to be here. Anna, if you want to leave, I will saddle a horse and take you to the train station in the next town over. I will give you the money for a ticket. Anna lowered the shirt she was mending. Where would I go? She asked, her voice trembling. I have no family. I have no money. And with a baby... She didn't finish the sentence. They both knew the truth. A woman alone with an infant, with no husband and no coin, had few options, and none of them were good. Luke nodded slowly. Then stay. Stay as long as you need. He took a breath, as if steeling himself. I will not lie to you. Anna, this life is lonely. A man gets tired of talking to his horse. When I saw you, I saw someone who needed a safe place, and I knew I had a place to give. I hope, in time, that maybe we could be a family, a real one, for the boy's sake, and for mine. He raised a hand before she could speak. But that is for a later time. Maybe never. If we just share the work and the meals, that is enough for me right now. I will be a father to Sam because every boy needs a man to teach him to ride and shoot. And I will be a husband to you in the eyes of the town so they show you respect. But inside this house, we are just two people trying to survive the winter. Anna looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the loneliness etched into the lines of his face, the hesitation of a man who was used to rejection. She thought of the men who had lied to her, who had promised the world and delivered only pain. But Luke's voice lacked the oily charm of a liar. It was dry and plain, like the land itself. I cannot promise anything. Luke, she said honestly, I am tired, and I am afraid. I know, Luke said. I am a patient man. The seasons take their time to turn. We can take ours. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks began to knit together into a fragile routine. The ranch demanded everything they had. Luke rose before the sun, the sound of him stoking the fire serving as Anna's alarm clock. He would drink a cup of coffee standing up, his eyes already on the window and the work waiting outside. Before heading out to the barn, Anna took over the cabin. She scrubbed the floorboards until the wood grain shone pale and clean. She organized the shelves, finding a logic in the chaos of Luke's bachelor supplies. She learned to bake bread in the temperamental wood stove, burning the first 2 loaves before finding the rhythm of the heat. Washing was the hardest task. She had to haul water from the well, heat it on the stove, and scrub the heavy denim and wool in a galvanized tub until her knuckles were raw and red. The wind was a constant companion, blowing dust through every crack, drying the clothes on the line in minutes but stiffening them with grit. Yet, there was peace in the labor. For the first time in years, Anna worked for herself and for her son, not for a master who tallied her debts. Sam thrived in the new environment, the fresh air and the consistent meals. Luke had traded a steer for a milk cow specifically for the baby, put meat on his bones. His cheeks grew round and pink. He began to crawl, dragging himself across the cabin floor with determined grunts. One afternoon, Luke came in for the midday meal, dusty and smelling of cattle. He stopped in the doorway. Sam was sitting in the middle of the floor, banging a wooden spoon against a tin pot, shrieking with laughter. Luke stood frozen, a strange expression on his face. "What is it?" Anna asked, wiping her hands on her apron, fearing she had let the baby make too much noise. Luke shook his head, a slow smile touching his lips. "I have not heard laughter in this house for 10 years. He said, "It is a good sound." He walked over to the baby and crouched down. Sam looked up, eyes wide, and then grinned, smacking the spoon against Luke's boot. "Hello there, little man," Luke whispered. "You making music?" He reached out a large, gloved finger. Sam grabbed it with his entire fist, holding on tight. Luke looked up at Anna, and for a moment, the distance between them vanished. His eyes were soft, filled with a wonder that made Anna's breath catch in her throat. "He has a grip like a wrangler," Luke said. "He likes you," Anna replied softly. The moment held for a heartbeat longer, warm and terrifyingly intimate, until the kettle on the stove whistled, breaking the spell. But the world outside the fence line was not as kind as the world within it. 2 months after their arrival, they made a trip to town for winter supplies. The town of Iron Creek seemed smaller now to Anna, but sharper. They walked into the General Mercantile, Luke carrying a list, Anna carrying Sam. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully, but the silence that fell over the store was immediate and cold. 2 women standing by the bolt of fabric turned their backs deliberately. A mother yanked her curious child away from Anna as if she were carrying a contagion. Anna kept her chin up, though her face burned. She focused on the shelves of canned peaches, refusing to meet the eyes that bore into her. Luke walked to the counter. The shopkeeper, a balding man named Mr. Henderson, who had always greeted Luke with a handshake, now kept his hands flat on the wood. "Morning," Luke said. Henderson nodded curtly. "Luke, I need 50 pounds of flour," Luke said, "and a sack of sugar. And the lady needs some flannel for the baby." Henderson didn't look at Anna. He looked past her, as if she were a ghost. "I can get the flour," he said to Luke, "but I am out of flannel." Anna saw the bolt of blue flannel sitting on the shelf behind him. She opened her mouth to speak, but Luke beat her to it. "It is right there on the shelf." "Amos," Luke said, his voice calm but with an edge of steel. Henderson flushed. "That is spoken for Mrs. Gable ordered it." "I see," Luke said. He leaned forward slightly. From the back of the store, a man's voice cut through the tension. "Why do you bother dressing it up?" "Luke, a whore does not need flannel. She needs a darker room." It was one of the ranch hands from the auction, leaning against a barrel of pickles, grinning. The air in the store vanished. Anna felt the blood drain from her face. She stepped back, clutching Sam, wishing the floor would open up and swallow her. Luke turned slowly. His movements were deliberate. He did not look like a man who was angry. He looked like a man who was deciding where to bury a body. He walked over to the ranch hand. The man's grin faltered as Luke got closer. Luke was not the biggest man in the territory, but he possessed a quiet, dense gravity that made other men nervous. Luke stopped a foot away from the man. "You will apologize to my wife," Luke said. The man laughed, though it sounded nervous. "Wife? You bought her for $100. Luke, everybody knows it. You can call a mule a racehorse, but it is still a mule." Luke moved so fast Anna barely saw it. One moment he was standing still. The next, he had the man by the lapels of his coat and had slammed him back against the pickle barrel. The barrel rocked, brine splashing onto the floor. "She is my wife," Luke said, his voice a low growl that vibrated in the small room. "And the boy is my son. You say another word that is not an apology, and I will break your jaw in 3 places." The ranch hand stared at him, eyes wide. He saw the cold promise in Luke's eyes. I didn't mean nothing," the man stammered. "Just a joke. Apologize," Luke commanded. The man looked at Anna. "Sorry, ma'am." Luke held him for a second longer, then shoved him away with disgust. He turned back to the counter. Henderson was pale, his hands shaking slightly. "The flannel." "Amos," Luke said, "all of it." They rode home in silence. Anna sat on the buckboard seat, her heart still hammering against her ribs. She felt a confusing storm of emotions. Shame for being the cause of the scene, fear that the town would never let them be. But beneath it all, a fierce, glowing warmth. He had called her his wife. He had threatened violence for her honor. No man had ever done that for her. Men fought over her like dogs fighting over a bone, but never for her. When they reached the ranch, Luke unloaded the wagon without a word. It wasn't until they were inside, with the fire crackling, that Anna spoke. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "It only makes them talk more." "Let them talk," Luke said, hanging his hat on the peg. "Words are wind, but I will not let them disrespect you to your face. Not while you are with me." "Thank you," Anna whispered. Luke looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't look away immediately. He held her gaze, his expression searching. "You are worth defending. Anna, you need to start believing that." That night, the boundaries in the cabin felt different. They were still there, but they were softer. Luke slept on his pallet, and Anna in the bed, but the space between them hummed with a new awareness. Small kindnesses began to bridge the gap. Winter was coming on fast. The air grew brittle, and the water in the trough froze over at night. Anna's hands, constantly wet from washing and scrubbing, began to crack and bleed. The skin on her knuckles turned raw, stinging every time she dipped them into the wash basin. One evening, Anna was sitting by the fire, rubbing her aching hands together. Luke was oiling his saddle leather nearby. He watched her for a moment, then stood up and went to the shelf. He came back with a small tin of tallow he used for his boots and for dry skin. "Here," he said, holding it out. Anna looked up. "What is it?" "Tallow and beeswax. My mother used to make it. It helps the cracking." He hesitated, then knelt on one knee beside her chair. "Give me your hand." Anna extended her hand slowly. It looked small and battered in his large, calloused palm. Luke dipped his fingers into the tin and began to rub the salve into her skin. His touch was incredibly gentle. He worked the grease into her knuckles, his thumb moving in slow, rhythmic circles. Anna watched him. His head was bent, his dark hair falling over his forehead. She felt the heat of his hands seeping into her bones. It was the first time he had touched her skin since helping her onto the wagon, and the sensation was electric. She felt a shiver run up her arm, settling deep in her chest. Luke focused entirely on her hand, but a flush rose on his cheekbones. He finished one hand and took the other. The silence in the room was thick, heavy with the scent of beeswax and the unsaid. "Thank you, Luke," she breathed. He looked up then. His eyes were dark, the pupils blown wide in the dim light. He looked at her mouth, then quickly back at her hands. "You work hard, Anna. Harder than you should have to." He released her hands and stood up abruptly, clearing his throat. "I need to check the stove." He retreated to the other side of the room, but Anna sat there for a long time, holding her greased hands to her chest, feeling the phantom pressure of his thumb. The attraction grew like a slow-burning fire. Anna found herself watching him when he didn't know it. She watched him through the window as he chopped wood, the rhythmic thwack of the axe echoing across the yard. She watched the muscles in his back shift under his worn flannel shirt, the way his forearms corded with effort. He was a strong man, capable and enduring. The limp that marred his walk vanished when he worked. He was graceful in his labor, and she knew he watched her. She would look up from feeding Sam to find Luke's eyes on her, soft and longing, before he would quickly look away. The conversations at dinner grew longer. They talked about the weather, the cattle, the price of grain. But beneath the mundane words, they were learning the cadence of each other's voices. Then came the night of the blizzard. The wind had been howling all day, a high, keening shriek that rattled the door in its frame. By nightfall, the snow was driving sideways, piling up against the north wall of the cabin. The temperature dropped until the frost formed patterns on the inside of the glass. They sat close to the fire, the only warm spot in the house. Sam was asleep in a basket near the hearth. Luke was mending a bridle. Anna was knitting. "Tell me about the fire," Anna said suddenly. Luke's hand stilled on the leather. He didn't ask which fire. It was Rustler's, he said, his voice flat. 10 years ago. I was 20. My brother was 12. My parents were good people. They just refused to sell the land when the big cattle barons wanted it." He stared into the flames, his eyes seeing ghosts. They came at night. They barred the doors from the outside and threw torches on the roof. I was in the barn, keeping watch over a sick mare. By the time I smelled the smoke, it was too late. The roof had already collapsed. I tried to get to the door, to break it down. That is how I got the burn on my leg. But the heat, he swallowed hard. I heard them screaming, "Anna." And then I didn't. I was 10 yards away, and I couldn't do a thing but watch them burn. Anna reached out and placed her hand over his. He flinched, then turned his hand over and gripped hers tightly. "I am so sorry. Luke, I have spent 10 years trying to pay for it," he whispered. "Trying to be a man who saves things, instead of watching them die. That is why, when I saw you on that stage," he looked at her, his defense stripped away. "I couldn't watch another family be destroyed." Anna's heart broke for him. In return, she gave him her own ghosts. "My father was a gambler," she said. "He sold me to a man named Cyrus when I was 16 to cover a poker debt. He was a devil. He told me I had to work off the $200 my father owed. I worked for 4 years. Cooking, cleaning, other things." Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to continue. "Every time I thought I was close to paying it off, he would add interest or charge me for my food. I was never going to be free. When Thomas, Sam's father, helped me run away, I thought it was over, but Thomas died, and Cyrus's partners found me. That is how I ended up with Vance." She looked at Luke, tears standing in her eyes. "I have been property since I was 16. Luke, I don't know how to be anything else." Luke turned his chair fully toward her. He reached out and cupped her face in his rough hands. His thumbs brushed away the tears on her cheeks. "You are not property. Anna, you are the strongest woman I have ever known. You survived. You kept that boy alive. That is not weakness. That is iron." The air between them crackled. The shared pain, the vulnerability, stripped away the last of the awkwardness. Luke's gaze dropped to her lips. Anna felt her breath hitch. She didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. The wind howled outside, a beast trying to get in. But in the circle of firelight, there was only the two of them. Luke's thumb traced her lower lip. "Anna," he whispered. He leaned in. Anna could feel his breath, warm and smelling of coffee, against her skin. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm. She wanted this. She wanted him to kiss her, to erase the memory of rough hands and cruel words. She tilted her head up. Their lips were a breath apart. Then, a log in the fire snapped with a loud crack, sending a shower of sparks against the screen. Sam shifted in his basket and let out a soft cry. Luke pulled back as if he had been burned. He stood up, his chest heaving, his face flushed. He ran a hand through his hair, turning away from her. I am sorry, he stammered. I promised I wouldn't. Anna sat there, bereft, her skin cold where his hands had been. It is okay. Luke, she whispered, though her body ached with a sudden, sharp emptiness. I should check the stock, Luke said, grabbing his coat and hat. The storm. I need to check the stock. He fled the cabin, diving into the blizzard rather than face the heat rising between them. Anna touched her lips, trembling. She was terrified. She was terrified because for the first time in her life, she didn't just want a man to protect her. She wanted a man to love her. And she wasn't sure she knew how to be loved. A week later, the snow had melted into a slush of mud and gray ice. The sun was out, but it was cold and pale. Luke was in the barn. Anna was hanging laundry on the line, Sam playing in a crate nearby. She looked toward the horizon, scanning the road as she always did, a habit of the hunted. A rider was sitting on the ridge, perhaps a mile out. He wasn't moving. He was just watching the ranch. Anna dropped the wet shirt she was holding. She knew that silhouette. She knew the way the man sat his horse. Luke walked out of the barn, sensing her fear. He followed her gaze. He squinted against the glare. Who is it? He asked quietly. Anna swallowed the bile in her throat. That is Silas, she whispered. He works for Cyrus, the man who owned my debt before. Luke stared at the rider. His face went still, turning into a mask of stone. He reached down and unhooked the leather thong over the hammer of the Colt revolver on his hip. Go inside. Anna, he said. Take the boy. The rider on the hill turned his horse and disappeared behind the ridge, heading back toward town. He didn't approach. He didn't need to. The message was clear. They had been found. Luke stood watching the empty ridge for a long time, the peace of the last few months. The fragile home they had built suddenly felt as thin as paper. He turned to look at the cabin, where Anna had bolted the door. He would not let them take her. He would burn the whole world down before he let them take her back. But as he looked at his shaking hands, he wondered if even that would be enough. The ride back from Iron Creek was heavy with a silence that had nothing to do with the wind. Luke sat hunched on the wagon seat, the reins loose in his gloved hands, his eyes fixed on the twin ruts of the road. Beside him, Anna clutched Sam, the baby wrapped in 3 layers of wool against the biting chill of late autumn. The sky was a flat, bruised gray, promising snow before the week was out. But the cold settling in Anna's bones came from the look on Luke's face when he had walked out of the sheriff's office an hour ago. He had not spoken since they left the town limits. He had simply loaded the sacks of grain, checked the cinch on the saddle horse tied to the back, and snapped the reins. Anna watched the muscles in his jaw work. She knew the rider they had seen on the ridge days ago had been an omen. She waited, her heart beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs, until the tension became suffocating. What is it? She asked, her voice snatched away by the breeze. Tell me. Luke! Luke sighed, a sound like a saw cutting through hard wood. He didn't look at her immediately. He watched a hawk circling low over the dying grass. I spoke to the deputy, Luke said finally. He says there is talk, angry talk, about us, about the sale. Luke turned to her then, and his eyes were dark with worry. Vance is saying he was swindled. But it is not just Vance. There is another man in town, a man named Cyrus. He claims Vance had no right to sell your contract because the debt belonged to him. He claims I bought stolen property. The name hit Anna like a physical blow. She gasped, shrinking back against the hard wood of the seat. The blood drained from her face so fast that she felt dizzy. Cyrus. The name was a phantom she thought she had outrun. It conjured memories of cigar smoke, of a heavy hand on her shoulder, of a ledger book that never balanced no matter how hard she worked. He is here, she whispered. He is in Iron Creek, Luke confirmed grimly. And he is making noise. He says he wants his property returned. He says he wants the woman and the child, or he will burn me out for thievery. Anna looked down at Sam. The baby was sleeping peacefully, unaware that he was being discussed as if he were a stolen calf. Panic, cold and sharp, rose in her throat. "He will take us," she said, her voice trembling. "He has the papers. Luke, he always has papers. He knows judges. He knows the law. You cannot fight him." Luke pulled the horses to a halt. The wagon creaked into silence in the middle of the vast, empty plain. He turned on the seat, shifting his bulk to face her fully. "I cannot fight what I do not know. Anna." His voice was urgent, demanding but not cruel. "You have to tell me everything, not the bits and pieces you told me by the fire. I need to know exactly what he has on you. I need to know what you signed. If I am going into a war with this man, I need to know where the ground stands." Anna looked at the horizon. She felt a crushing wave of shame. To tell him the truth was to strip herself bare, to admit to the depths of her degradation. She was terrified that if she spoke the words aloud, the respect she had seen in Luke's eyes, the respect she had begun to crave like water, would turn to disgust. "He will twist it," she whispered. "He always twists it." "Tell me," Luke commanded softly. Anna took a shuddering breath. She didn't look at him. She looked at the fraying blanket around her son. "My father owed him $200, she began, the words tasting like ash. "Cyrus ran the gaming hall in the mining camp where we lived. When my father couldn't pay, Cyrus told him he would take me as collateral. I was 16. She paused, waiting for Luke to pull away. He didn't move. I signed a paper. It said I would work as a housekeeper and a server until the debt was paid. But the wages he wrote in the book were pennies, and he charged me for everything. For the room I slept in, for the soap I used to wash my face, for the dress he made me wear." Tears pricked her eyes, hot and stinging. At the end of the first year, he told me I owed him $300. The debt had grown. He said if I wanted to pay it down faster, there were other ways to work. Upstairs. She squeezed her eyes shut, unable to say the rest. The silence stretched, filled only by the wind hissing through the dry stalks of grass. She waited for the judgment. She waited for Luke to realize he had brought a stained, broken woman into his home. "I never said yes," she whispered fiercely. "I never said yes to that, but he made it so I had no choice. He would lock the pantry. He would threaten to throw my father in the mine shaft. So I worked. I scrubbed floors until my hands bled. I served drinks to men who grabbed at me. And when Thomas took me away, when we ran, I thought the debt was left behind. But Cyrus, he never lets a nickel go." She finally looked up, bracing herself for his revulsion. Luke was not looking at her with disgust. He was looking at her with a fury so intense it frightened her. But the fury was not directed at her. His eyes were hard, his jaw set in a line of white tension, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. "He kept you prisoner with a pen and ink," Luke said, his voice low and dangerous. "He calls it business." Anna said, "It is slavery." Luke spat. "It is slavery by another name." He reached out and took her hand. His grip was firm, grounding her. "Listen to me. Anna, you listen to me good. There is no paper in this world that gives a man the right to own a human being. I don't care what his ledger says. I don't care what debts he thinks are owed. You paid that debt 1,000 times over with your sweat and your fear. But the law," Anna started. "The law is a piece of paper," Luke interrupted. "You are flesh and blood, and you are under my protection. Nothing you did to survive that devil makes you less than anyone else. Do you hear me? You are not tainted. You are a survivor, and I will be damned before I let him put chains on you again." Anna looked at him, stunned. The shame that had sat on her chest for years began to crack. He didn't see a whore. He didn't see a debtor. He saw her. For the rest of the ride home, Luke kept the horses at a brisk pace. The air between them had changed. It was no longer heavy with secrets. It was charged with a shared enemy and a shared resolve. That night, the cabin felt smaller, warmer. The confession had stripped away a barrier Anna hadn't realized was there. When she moved around the small kitchen, preparing supper, she felt Luke's eyes on her. It wasn't the wary watchfulness of the early days. It was a gaze that lingered on the curve of her back, on her hands as she sliced the bread. When she placed his plate on the table, her fingers grazed his wrist. He didn't pull away. He held his arm still, and for a second, the contact burned like a brand. She looked up, startled, and found him watching her with an expression of raw hunger that he quickly masked with a cough. "Thank you," he muttered, picking up his fork. Anna sat opposite him, her heart thumping. The threat from Cyrus was terrifying. Yes, but the feeling growing in this room, this slow, steady pull toward the man sitting across from her, was terrifying in a different way. 2 days later, the necessity of life forced them back toward civilization. They needed grain for the horses if they were to survive the winter. And Luke needed to speak to the blacksmith about a cracked plowshare. They rode into Iron Creek on a Sunday morning. The church bells were ringing, a flat, clanging sound that echoed off the wooden storefronts. The streets were filled with families walking to the white clapboard chapel at the end of Main Street. Luke drove the wagon slowly. Anna sat straight, her chin high, though she wanted nothing more than to hide under the blanket with Sam. As they passed the general store, a group of women stopped. They were dressed in their Sunday best, bonnets tight around their faces. They turned to watch the wagon pass. "I heard he keeps her like a pet," one woman whispered, her voice carrying clearly in the crisp air. "A fallen woman in a decent town," another sniffed, pulling her young daughter behind her skirts as if Anna's shadow might corrupt the child. "It is an abomination." Anna stared straight ahead, her knuckles white where she gripped the wagon seat. She felt the judgment like a physical weight, pressing her shoulders down. "Filth," the whispers seemed to say. "Unworthy." Luke's hands tightened on the reins. He clicked his tongue to the horses, urging them faster, his face a mask of stone. They tied the team in front of the livery. Luke helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. A silent message of support. "Stay close," he murmured. They walked toward the mercantile. As they passed the open doors of the church, the preacher's voice boomed out. He was a thin, severe man with eyes like polished coal. "And beware the temptation of the flesh," he shouted, his voice reaching the street. "Beware the Jezebel who comes with painted lips and a heart full of deceit. For the man who harbors sin in his home shall reap the whirlwind." He didn't say Anna's name. He didn't have to. The heads of the congregation turned slightly toward the open doors as Luke and Anna walked by. Anna felt the heat rise in her cheeks, a burning flush of humiliation. She stumbled slightly, her foot catching on a loose board in the boardwalk. Luke caught her elbow. "Steady," he said softly. They reached the mercantile, but before they could enter, a man stepped out of the saloon next door. It was not Cyrus, but one of the men who had been with him in the old days, a hired gun named Bo. He was leaning against a post, picking his teeth with a splinter of wood. "Well now," Bo drawled, spitting onto the dusty planks near Anna's hem. "If it isn't the runaway." "And her new keeper." Luke stopped. He moved Anna slightly behind him, shielding her with his body. "Get out of the way," Luke said evenly. Bo grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "You got a lot of nerve. Cowboy, walking around town with stolen goods. Cyrus is mighty unhappy. He says you owe him for the wear and tear on his property." He looked past Luke's shoulder at Anna, his eyes raking over her with disgusting familiarity. "How is she? Cowboy? She worth the money? I always found her a bit cold, myself, but I suppose a lonely man will take whatever scraps he can find." The insult hung in the air, gross and heavy. A few people on the street stopped to watch, holding their breath. Luke went very still. The calm that descended on him was more terrifying than any shout. He took one step forward. "Take it back," Luke said. Bo laughed. "Take what back?" "The truth. She is a whore. Friend. Always has been. Always will be. You can dress her up in calico, but—" Luke moved. It was a sudden, violent motion. He didn't draw the gun at his hip. He stepped in and drove a fist into Bo's stomach. doubling the man over. As Bo wheezed, Luke grabbed him by the collar and slammed him backward into the support post of the saloon porch. The wood groaned under the impact. Luke's face was inches from Bo's. His voice was a low, guttural snarl that Anna had never heard before. "She is my wife," Luke hissed. "She is the mother of my son, and she is under my protection." He shook the man, his knuckles white. "If you ever speak her name again, if you ever look at her again, I will not use my fists. I will put you in the ground. Do you understand me?" Bo gasped for air, nodding frantically, the bravado beaten out of him. Luke shoved him away. Bo scrambled backward in the dirt, coughing. Luke straightened his coat. He looked around at the townspeople who were staring with open mouths. He did not apologize. He did not look down. He turned to Anna, his chest heaving. "Let's go," he said. He took her arm, not roughly, but with a firm, possessive grip, and led her back to the wagon. He didn't stop for grain. He didn't stop for the plow. He drove them out of town as if the very air were poisoned. The ride home was a blur of speed and adrenaline. When they finally pulled up to the cabin, the sun was sinking low, casting long, bloody shadows across the grass. Luke jumped down and lifted Anna from the seat. He didn't let go of her immediately when her feet touched the ground. They stood there in the dying light, the dust of the road still on their clothes, the echo of the violence in town vibrating between them. Anna looked up at him. She was shaking, not from fear, she realized, but from a sudden, overwhelming surge of emotion. No one had ever done that. No one had ever claimed her. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice broke. You stood up for me. I told you," Luke said, his voice rough. "You are mine to look after." "I am not used to it," Anna said, tears spilling over. "I am used to men selling me, not fighting for me." Luke made a sound in his throat, a mix of pain and frustration. He reached out and lifted her chin with his finger, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were dark, burning with a fire that had been banked for months. "Then get used to it," he said, "because I'm not going anywhere." The moment stretched. The wind died down. The only sound was the stamping of the horses and the pop of the cooling stove inside the cabin. The distance between them, which they had maintained so carefully for so long, seemed to evaporate. Luke looked at her lips. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to turn away, to step back, to remind him of his promise. Anna didn't move. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She didn't want to run. She wanted to bridge the gap. She wanted to know what it felt like to be touched by a man who didn't want to take, but to give. She closed the small space between them. Luke's mouth brushed hers. It was hesitant at first, a question asked in the twilight. "Is this all right?" Anna answered by reaching up and gripping the lapels of his coat, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened. It wasn't smooth or practiced. It was desperate. It tasted of dust and coffee and suppressed longing. Luke groaned low in his chest, his arms coming around her, pulling her flush against his hard body. One of his hands tangled in her hair, cradling the back of her head, protecting her even in the midst of passion. For Anna, it was a revelation. There was no pain. There was no feeling of being small or used. There was only heat and strength and a feeling of coming home. She opened to him, pouring all her fear and her gratitude into the kiss, trying to tell him without words that he was rewriting the map of her world. They broke apart, gasping for air. Their foreheads rested against each other. Luke's hands were trembling where they held her waist. "Anna," he breathed, his voice wrecked. He pulled back a few inches, his eyes searching hers. Regret flashed across his face, not for the kiss, but for breaking his word. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I promised I wouldn't touch you. I lost my head." He stepped back, putting a foot of cold air between them. He looked terrified that he had frightened her. "I shouldn't have done that. Not until you are sure. Not until we are proper." Anna stood there, her lips tingling, her body alive with a hum of desire she had thought died years ago. She saw the conflict in him, the man of honor fighting the man of flesh. "Luke," she said softly. He turned away, running a hand over his face. I don't want you to think I am like them. Anna, I don't want you to think this is a payment for protection. It didn't feel like payment, Anna said. She wrapped her arms around herself, the cold rushing back in now that he was gone. But I don't know how to do this. Luke, I don't know how to be a wife. When you touch me, I feel, she struggled for the words. I feel dirty, not because of you, but because of what I remember. I'm afraid that if I want you, if I let myself want you, it makes me what they say I am. Luke turned back to her. His expression was fierce. No, he said firmly. He stepped close again, though he didn't touch her. Wanting is not a sin. Anna, it is human. What they did to you, that was theft. They stole your choice. But this, he gestured between them. This is yours. If you want it, it is clean. If you don't, it stops. Right here. He looked deep into her eyes. I want you. Anna, I have wanted you since the moment I saw you holding that boy in the auction yard. But I want your trust more. I will wait. I will wait until the snow melts. I will wait 10 years if I have to. You tell me when, you tell me if. Anna looked at him, tears blurring her vision again. She realized then that he was offering her the one thing she had never possessed, agency. Thank you, she whispered. Luke nodded. He looked exhausted, the adrenaline of the fight and the kiss draining out of him. Go inside, he said gently. Feed the boy. I'll put the horses up. The truce held, but the world outside did not pause. 2 days later, a deputy rode out to the ranch. He was a young man, nervous, his hat in his hands as he stood on the porch. Luke stood in the doorway, a rifle leaning casually against the jamb. Anna stood in the shadows behind him, listening. I'm sorry to bother you. Luke, the deputy said, but the sheriff wanted you to know. Cyrus isn't just talking anymore. What did he do? Luke asked. He's got a lawyer from Denver, a sharp-looking fellow with a briefcase full of papers. They filed a petition this morning. They are claiming you kidnapped the girl and the child. They are demanding a hearing. A hearing? Luke scoffed. In front of who? Judge Miller? The deputy nodded. Miller is the circuit judge. He's in town next week. And Luke, Cyrus has hired men, not just Bo, real guns. Hard cases from down south. Luke's jaw tightened. I appreciate the warning. Deputies, you watch your back. Luke, they say if the judge rules against you, they are coming to take her, law or no law. When the deputy rode away, the silence on the ranch was heavy and suffocating. The threat was no longer a vague cloud on the horizon. It was a storm about to break. That night, the wind picked up again, rattling the loose shingles on the roof. The cabin felt fragile, a tiny wooden box against a vast, hostile darkness. Anna couldn't sleep. She lay in the narrow bed. Sam curled against her side, staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the house sounded like a boot step on the porch. Every gust of wind sounded like a shout. She closed her eyes and drifted into a fitful doze. But the nightmares were waiting. She was back in the saloon. Cyrus was there, laughing, holding a burning brand. He was reaching for Sam. You owe me, he hissed. You owe me everything. No, Anna screamed. She bolted upright in bed, gasping, her heart hammering so hard it hurt. The room was dark. The fire burned down to embers. Shh, I'm here. The voice was low and calm. A match flared. Luke was sitting on the floor, his back against the wall near the head of the bed. He lit the lantern, keeping the flame low. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes. He clearly hadn't slept either. He was fully dressed, his gun belt hanging off the back of the chair within arm's reach. It was just a dream, Luke said softly. Anna shivered, the terror of the nightmare still clinging to her skin like sweat. I saw him taking Sam. Luke shifted, turning to face her. He reached through the bars of the headboard and took her hand. His skin was rough, warm, and real. He isn't here. Anna, the door is barred. The rifle is loaded. I am awake. He squeezed her hand. Look at me. You are safe. Anna looked at him. In the dim golden light, he looked like a guardian statue carved from oak. She slid down from the bed, bringing the quilt with her, and sat on the floor next to him. She couldn't bear to be alone in the bed, separated from his strength. She sat close, their shoulders touching. Luke didn't question it. He simply adjusted the quilt so it covered both of them. He put his arm around her, drawing her head down to his shoulder. It wasn't a sexual embrace. It was an anchor in a storm. Anna let out a long, shaky breath, the scent of him, wood smoke, soap, and gun oil, filling her senses. "I won't let them take you," Luke whispered into her hair. "I swear it." Anna closed her eyes, listening to the steady beat of his heart against her ear. The fear didn't vanish, but it receded, held at bay by the warmth of the man who had promised to be father and husband, and who was proving it with every breath he took. "We will fight," she whispered back. "Yes," Luke said, his grip tightening on her shoulder. "We will fight." They sat there in the silence, watching the embers fade. Two soldiers in a fortress, waiting for the dawn and the war that would come with it. The summons arrived on a Tuesday, carried by a rider who looked more like a bandit than an officer of the court. The paper was heavy, cream-colored, and folded with a precision that seemed alien in the rough interior of the cabin. Luke took it from the man with a grim nod, his hands dusted with flour from the morning bread dough. He broke the wax seal, his eyes scanning the dense, flowing script while Anna stood by the stove, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "It is a hearing," Luke said, his voice flat. He tossed the paper onto the table. It landed with a soft slap that sounded to Anna like a gavel coming down. She walked over slowly, afraid to touch it, as if the ink itself might burn her skin. "It says I am to appear before Judge Miller in Iron Creek on Friday," Luke continued, turning to look out the window where the gray prairie stretched endlessly. "It says I am in possession of stolen chattel, that I have unlawfully detained a woman bound by contract and a child who is property of the estate." The words hung in the air, poisonous and absurd. Property, estate, chattel. They were words used for cattle, for land, for inanimate things, not for a mother and her son. Anna gripped the edge of the table. "He found a judge," she whispered. "Judge Miller." Luke spat the name. "Miller is a man who likes fine whiskey and expensive cigars, and Cyrus has the money to buy him both." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that Anna had rarely seen in him. "They are not just claiming the debt, Anna, they are claiming kidnapping. They say I took you by force. That makes it a criminal matter. If I lose—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. If he lost, he would go to prison, and she would go back to Cyrus. The thought made the room spin. Luke saw her pale. He crossed the room in 2 long strides and took her by the shoulders. "We will fight this," he said, his eyes fierce. "I will ride into town tomorrow. I will find a lawyer. There has to be one honest man in this territory." But Anna saw the doubt in his eyes. She saw the way his gaze flickered to the rifle over the door, then to the meager pile of coins in the tin cup on the shelf. He was a cowboy, not a politician. He knew horses and weather, not the twisted logic of corrupt courtrooms. That night, the silence in the cabin was suffocating. Luke sat at the table, counting and recounting their savings. It was not enough. Anna knew it wasn't enough. Cyrus had wealth built on the ruin of others. Luke had only his hands and his honor. Anna lay in the bed, Sam sleeping warmly against her side, and watched Luke's silhouette by the dying fire. She saw the slump of his shoulders. She saw the weight pressing down on him. He was going to lose everything. The ranch, his freedom, his life, all for her. The guilt was a physical pain, sharp and tearing. She had brought this storm to his door. He had been a lonely man. Yes, but he had been safe. Now, because of her, he was facing ruin. "If I am gone," she thought, the idea taking root like a dark seed, "there is no case. If I disappear, they cannot say he is detaining me. They cannot take what he does not have." The logic seemed flawless in the cold light of her fear. If she ran, Luke would be safe. He would be heartbroken, perhaps, but he would be free. She waited until Luke's breathing deepened into the rhythm of sleep. He was exhausted, his body worn down by the stress and the physical labor of the ranch. She moved slowly, sliding out from under the quilt. The floorboards were cold against her bare feet. She dressed in the dark, her hands shaking. She put on her sturdy boots and the heavy coat Luke had given her that first night on the trail. She packed a small sack with dried beef, a few biscuits, and a canteen of water. Then she turned to the bed. Sam was heavy in sleep. She wrapped him tightly in his woolen blanket, praying he wouldn't cry. He stirred, letting out a soft sigh, but didn't wake. She lifted him into her arms. She paused at the door, looking back at Luke. He was asleep on his pallet, one arm thrown over his eyes. He looked peaceful, younger than his 30 years. Tears stung her eyes, hot and blinding. She wanted to wake him. She wanted to crawl into his arms and beg him to make it right, but that would be selfish. Loving him meant saving him, even if it meant breaking her own heart. "Goodbye, Luke," she whispered into the darkness. She unlatched the door. The wind caught it, threatening to rip it from her grasp. But she held it firm, slipping out into the night. The world outside was a void. The wind was brutal, a living thing that shrieked across the plains, tearing at her clothes and stinging her eyes with grit. There was no moon. The clouds were thick and low, suffocating the stars. Anna bowed her head against the gale and began to walk. She headed south, toward the railroad tracks that lay 10 miles away. If she could reach the tracks, she could follow them to the next town. She could find a way, but the prairie at night was a deceptive beast. In the daylight, the land looked flat and uniform. In the dark, it was a labyrinth of dips, ridges, and ankle-breaking holes. Within 20 minutes, Anna was disoriented. The wind seemed to come from all directions at once, confusing her sense of hearing. The dust coated her throat, making it hard to breathe. She stumbled, her boot catching on a root, and went down hard on one knee. She twisted her body to protect Sam, taking the impact on her shoulder. Pain shot through her arm, but she scrambled up, panic rising. "Just keep walking," she told herself. "Don't stop." An hour passed, then 2. The cold began to seep through the heavy coat. Her fingers were numb. Sam woke up and began to wail, his cry thin and terrified against the roar of the wind. "Hush, baby, hush," Anna sobbed, rocking him as she walked. She was lost. She knew it now. She had veered off the path. She was wandering in circles in the vast emptiness. Despair clawed at her. She was going to die out here. She and her son would freeze to death in the middle of nowhere, and Luke would never know why she left. Then, through the howling wind, she heard a sound. It was a rhythmic thudding, deep and heavy. Hoofbeats. She turned, squinting into the blackness. A shout echoed, "Anna!" It was Luke. She didn't know whether to run or collapse. Shame and relief warred in her chest. "Anna, answer me!" His voice was ragged with terror. "Here!" she screamed, though the wind snatched the word away. "I am here." A dark shape emerged from the gloom. The horse was lathered, its breath pluming in the cold air. Luke pulled the animal up sharply, sliding from the saddle before the horse had even stopped moving. He ran to her. He didn't look like the calm, stoic cowboy she knew. His hat was gone, lost to the wind. His hair was wild, his face pale and twisted with emotion. He grabbed her by the shoulders, his grip hard enough to bruise. "What are you doing?" he shouted over the wind. "What in God's name are you doing?" Anna began to cry, great racking sobs that shook her entire body. "I had to go," she screamed back. "I had to save you. They will destroy you. Luke, they will put you in jail. I couldn't let you lose everything for me." Luke stared at her. The anger in his face crumbled, replaced by a look of such profound devastation that Anna felt her knees give way. "Save me?" Luke choked out. "You think you are saving me?" He pulled her into his chest, wrapping his arms around her and the baby, crushing them against him as if he could merge their bodies into one. "You are everything," he whispered fiercely into her ear. his voice breaking. "You are everything I have. If you leave, there is nothing left to save." He pulled back just enough to look at her. The wind whipped her hair across her face, but she saw his eyes. They were wet with tears. "I lived in that silence for 10 years. Anna, I woke up every morning to an empty house and a cold stove. I thought that was all I deserved. And then you came." He framed her face with his frozen hands. "You and that boy. You are my family. Do you understand? It is not about the debt. It is not about the law. It is about us. I would rather rot in a cell knowing I fought for you than live 100 years in that house alone." The truth of his words hit her with the force of the gale. He wasn't protecting a charity case. He wasn't fulfilling a duty. He loved her. He needed her just as much as she needed him. "Luke," she whispered. The intensity of the moment, the adrenaline of the chase, the brush with death, it all ignited something primal between them. The barrier of propriety, the careful distance they had maintained, shattered. Luke looked at her mouth. His gaze was dark, hungry, stripped of all pretense. He didn't ask this time. He didn't hesitate. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was the desperate claim of a man who had almost lost the only thing that mattered. Anna met him with equal force. She dropped the sack of food she was holding and wrapped her free arm around his neck, pulling him down to her. The cold vanished. The wind vanished. There was only the heat of his body, the roughness of his unshaven jaw, the taste of salt and desperation on his lips. Luke groaned, a low sound of want that vibrated against her chest. His hands roamed over the thick coat, pressing her closer, needing to feel the reality of her survival. For a long moment, under the indifferent stars, they were just a man and a woman, alive and burning. Then, Luke pulled back. He was breathing hard, his forehead resting against hers. His hands were still on her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. He closed his eyes, struggling for control. "No," he whispered. "Not like this." He opened his eyes and looked at her, his expression fierce but tender. "Not out here in the dirt and the wind. Anna, not while we are running away." He kissed her forehead, a lingering, sacred touch. "When I take you as my wife, it will be in peace. It will be in safety. It will be because we won, not because we were afraid. You deserve better than a desperate tumble in the dark." Anna looked up at him, her lips swollen, her heart racing. She felt a wash of frustration. Her body was screaming for him, but beneath it, a profound sense of worth. He wanted her enough to stop. He valued her enough to wait. For the first time in her life, the word no was a gift. It wasn't a rejection. It was a promise. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Luke nodded. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. He looked down at Sam, who was whimpering in the bundle. "Let's go home," Luke said. He lifted her onto the horse, swinging up behind her. He wrapped the heavy canvas of his duster around both of them, cocooning them together. As they turned the horse back toward the ranch, Anna leaned back against his chest. She could feel his heart beating against her back, steady and strong. They didn't speak on the ride back. They didn't have to. The decision had been made in the howling wind. They were not victims running from a predator. They were partners, and they were going to fight. But the predator was not waiting for the court date. 2 days after the failed escape, the harassment began. It started small. A section of the north fence was cut in the night, allowing 3 head of cattle to wander off. Luke spent the entire day tracking them down and repairing the wire. His face set in a grim line. Then, dead rats were thrown into the well. It took them 2 days of boiling water and hauling buckets to clear it, days where they had to ration every drop. Luke didn't sleep. He sat on the porch at night with the Winchester across his lap, watching the dark. Anna sat just inside the door, sewing by the light of a single candle, keeping vigil with him. The escalation came on a Thursday night. The wind had died down, leaving the air still and cold. Anna had just put Sam down in his cradle when a bright orange glow lit up the window. "Fire!" Luke shouted from the porch. Anna rushed to the door. The small outbuilding where they kept the winter hay and the extra tack was ablaze. The flames were licking up the side of the dry wood, casting long, dancing shadows across the yard. "Get the buckets!" Luke yelled, already running toward the well. Anna didn't hesitate. She grabbed the 2 galvanized pails by the door and ran. The fear was there, choking her, but she pushed it down. If the fire spread to the barn, they would lose the horses. If it spread to the house, they would lose everything. For an hour, they fought the beast. Luke hauled water from the trough, his muscles straining, while Anna threw dirt and soaked blankets onto the flames. The heat was searing. Smoke filled their lungs, making them cough and gag. "Work the edges!" Luke roared, his face smeared with soot. "Don't let it jump to the grass." Anna shoveled dirt until her arms screamed with pain. She beat at the flames with a wet burlap sack, sparks burning small holes in her dress. She worked side by side with Luke, their movements synchronized by necessity. They were a team, a single unit moving against the destruction. Finally, the roof of the shed collapsed inward with a crash, smothering the heart of the fire. They spent another 20 minutes dousing the embers until only steam and smoke rose into the night air. Luke dropped his bucket. He staggered back, leaning against the corral fence, gasping for air. Anna walked over to him. Her hair had come loose from its pins, hanging in wild tangles around her face. Her dress was ruined, stained black with ash. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice rasping. Luke looked at her. He wiped a hand across his forehead, leaving a streak of grime. He shook his head. "No, I am fine." They stared at each other. They were filthy, exhausted, and smelled of smoke. But in that moment, Anna thought he was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, and she saw the same look in his eyes. He reached out and pulled her to him. It wasn't the desperate embrace of the ridge. It was a collapse. They held each other up, their bodies heavy against one another. "We beat it," Luke whispered into her smoky hair. "We beat it." They walked back to the cabin, leaning on each other. Inside, the fire in the hearth had burned low. They didn't talk. They didn't have the energy. Luke collapsed onto his pallet, and Anna sank down onto the rug beside him. She reached for the water ladle, took a drink, and handed it to him. He drank deeply, water spilling down his chin, cutting tracks through the soot. He handed the ladle back, but didn't let go of her hand. He pulled her closer until she was resting against his chest. "Stay," he murmured, "just for a minute." Anna laid her head on his shoulder. She traced the line of the scar on his jaw with a blackened finger. He turned his face into her palm, kissing the center of her hand. It was a gesture of such tenderness that it made her chest ache. "We are going to win," Anna whispered. "Yes," Luke said, his eyes closing. "We are." But the enemy was not done. The next afternoon, Luke rode out to the south pasture to check on the herd, worried that the fire had spooked them into a stampede. He took the big bay horse, leaving Anna with the rifle and a warning to keep the door bolted. Anna was washing the soot from the floor when she heard it, a heavy thud against the wood of the door. "Luke," she called out, though she knew it wasn't him. Luke wouldn't knock. "Open up, girl." The voice was unfamiliar. It was low, gravelly, and cruel. It wasn't Bo. It was someone new. Anna dropped the rag. She moved silently to the cradle and picked up Sam, moving him to the corner behind the stove. She grabbed the Winchester from its rack on the wall. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them to steady. She jacked a shell into the chamber. The metallic clack-clack was loud in the quiet room. "I am armed," she shouted. "Go away!" Laughter came from the other side of the door. A woman with a gun is like a cat with a knitting needle. "Open the door, Anna. Cyrus wants his property back. We can do this easy, or we can do this hard." The door handle rattled violently. Then, a heavy boot kicked the wood near the lock. The bolt groaned. Anna backed up until she was standing in front of the baby. She raised the rifle. She had never fired a gun at a man. She had never hurt a living soul. But as she looked at the trembling door, she thought of Sam. She thought of Luke, riding home to find an empty house. The fear vanished. In its place came a cold, white rage. "Kick it again," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Kick it again and see what happens." The man outside laughed again. "Feisty. I like feisty." The door exploded inward. The wood around the lock splintered, and the door swung open, banging against the wall. A man stepped into the threshold. He was huge, with a beard that hid half his face and a coat made of buffalo hide. He was grinning. He took one step into the room. Anna didn't hesitate. She didn't scream. She aimed at the doorframe, 6 inches from his head, and pulled the trigger. The boom of the rifle was deafening in the small space. Wood chips sprayed the man's face. He flinched violently, stumbling back onto the porch, his hands flying up to protect his eyes. "The next one goes in your chest," Anna screamed. Her ears were ringing, the smell of gunpowder sharp in her nose. She worked the lever action, ejecting the spent shell and loading a fresh one. "Get out!" The man stared at her. He looked at the smoking barrel of the rifle. He looked at her eyes. He didn't see a victim. He saw a mother wolf backed into a corner. "You crazy bitch," he yelled, backing down the steps. "I said get out." Anna took a step forward, the rifle steady at her shoulder. The man turned and ran. He scrambled onto his horse, which was tied to the rail, and galloped away, kicking up dust as he fled. Anna stood in the doorway, the rifle still raised, watching him until he was a speck on the horizon. Only then did she lower the gun. Her knees gave way, and she slid down the doorframe to the floor. She was sitting there, hugging the rifle to her chest. When Luke came thundering into the yard 20 minutes later, he had heard the shot. He leapt from his horse before it stopped, running up the steps with his revolver drawn. He saw the splintered door. He saw Anna sitting on the floor. "Anna!" He dropped to his knees, his hands frantically checking her for blood. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" Anna looked up. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, but her eyes were clear. "No," she said quietly. "He broke the door, but I sent him running." Luke looked at the door jamb, where the bullet hole was shattered into the wood. He looked back at Anna. He realized then that he had underestimated her. He had thought he needed to save her, but she had saved herself. He holstered his gun and pulled her into his arms. He held her tight, rocking her back and forth. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I am so sorry I wasn't here." "It's okay," Anna said into his coat. "I protected us." Luke pulled back. He looked at the broken lock. His face hardened into a mask of cold resolve. "That is the last time," he said. He stood up and offered her his hand. "Pack the wagon, Anna." Anna blinked. "We are running." "No," Luke said. "We are done waiting for Friday. We are done waiting for judges and lawyers." He looked toward the town, his eyes narrowing. "If they want a war, we will give them one. But we finish it on our terms. Today." He looked down at her. And for the first time, he spoke to her not as a protector, but as a general speaking to a soldier. "Are you with me?" Anna gripped the rifle. She thought of the fear, the fire, and the man in the buffalo coat. She stood up. "I am with you," she said. Luke nodded. "Then let's go end this." The morning of the hearing arrived wrapped in a shroud of gray mist. The sky was a low, heavy ceiling that pressed down upon the high plains, trapping the scent of wet earth and coal smoke close to the ground. It had rained during the night, a cold, miserable drizzle that turned the main street of Iron Creek into a slurry of thick, clinging mud. Luke drove the wagon. He wore his Sunday best, a dark coat that was brushed clean of dust but showed the wear of the years at the elbows. His hat was pulled low, the brim dripping water. Beside him, Anna sat rigid. She wore the blue dress she had mended a dozen times, her hair pulled back severely from her face. Sam was bundled in her lap, shielded from the damp air by the heavy wool coat Luke had given her weeks ago. They did not speak. The silence between them was not the awkward distance of their early days, nor the comfortable quiet of the evenings by the fire. It was the silence of soldiers moving toward a front line. As the wagon rattled past the livery stable and turned onto the main thoroughfare, Anna saw the town through new eyes. It was no longer just a collection of buildings. It was a theater where her life would be dissected. People were gathering. Men stood under the awnings of the general store, smoking pipes and watching with open curiosity. Women peered through the glass of the millinery shop. "They are watching," Anna whispered, pulling Sam closer. "Let them watch," Luke said, his voice steady. "They are about to see something they do not expect." He pulled the horses to a stop in front of the town hall, a large wooden structure that served as a meeting place, a dance hall, and, when the circuit judge was in town, a court of law. Luke climbed down into the mud, ignoring the splatter on his boots. He walked around to the passenger side and lifted Anna down. He held her a moment longer than necessary, his hands firm on her waist. "Head up." "Anna," he said softly, "you have done nothing wrong. Remember that." Anna nodded, swallowing the lump of terror in her throat. She stepped onto the boardwalk, the wood slick with rain. Just then, a carriage turned the corner. It was a fine black carriage with spoked wheels painted red, drawn by two sleek bays that looked like they had never seen a plow. The door opened, and a man stepped out. It was Cyrus. Anna felt her blood turn to ice. He looked exactly as she remembered, yet somehow worse because he was here, in this open air, invading the new life she had tried to build. He wore a tailored suit of gray wool, a silk vest, and a gold watch chain that glinted even in the dull light. His beard was trimmed to a sharp point, and his eyes, pale, watery blue, scanned the street with an air of supreme ownership. Behind him stepped a man carrying a leather briefcase. He was thin, with spectacles perched on a narrow nose. The lawyer from Denver. And flanking them were two men Anna recognized from the night they broke down her door. They leaned against the carriage, chewing on toothpicks, their coats falling open to reveal the pistols at their belts. Cyrus saw her. A slow, oily smile spread across his face. He tipped his hat, a gesture that felt like a slap. "Anna," he called out, "you are looking well. Country air seems to suit you." Luke stepped in front of her, blocking Cyrus's view. "Save your breath for the judge." "Cyrus," Luke said. Cyrus chuckled, a dry sound like dead leaves scraping together. "Always the hero, aren't you? Cowboy. We will see how heroic you feel when the law puts you in shackles for theft." He turned and swept into the hall, his lawyer following like a shadow. Luke turned to Anna. He took her arm. "Come on." The courtroom was crowded. It seemed half the town had squeezed onto the benches, hungry for the spectacle. The air was hot and smelled of damp wool, tobacco, and unwashed bodies. When Anna walked in, the murmur of conversation died abruptly, replaced by a heavy, judging silence. She felt the eyes crawling over her. She heard the whispers. "That is her, the one from the auction. I heard she was a saloon girl in Deadwood. Look at the baby. Poor thing doesn't even know who his father is." Anna kept her eyes fixed on the back of the empty bench at the front of the room. She sat down, her hands white-knuckled around Sam. Luke sat beside her, his shoulder pressing against hers, a solid wall of heat and support. Judge Miller entered from a side door. He was an older man with a face that looked like it had been carved from soft dough. He had sparse gray hair and eyes that looked tired. He sat heavily behind the raised desk, arranging his papers with the slowness of a man who was paid by the hour. He banged a wooden gavel once. "This court is now in session," Miller wheezed. "We are hearing the petition of Mr. Cyrus Thorne versus Mr. Luke Miller regarding the matter of contractual debt and disputed property." The lawyer from Denver stood up. He smoothed his vest and walked to the center of the room. He did not look at Anna. He spoke to the judge with a smooth, polished cadence that sounded entirely out of place in the rough-hewn room. "Your Honor," he began, "we are here to rectify a gross violation of property rights. My client, Mr. Thorne, holds a valid, signed contract for the labor and services of the woman known as Anna. This contract, signed 4 years ago, stipulates that she remain in his employ until a debt of $300 is repaid in full." He held up a piece of paper, waving it like a flag. "Furthermore," the lawyer continued, his voice dropping to a tone of mock sorrow, "the defendant, Mr. Luke did willfully and illegally abscond with this debtor. He participated in a sham auction conducted by a third party who had no legal right to sell the contract. Therefore, the woman and the child born under her tenure of service, who is considered a dependent asset of the estate, must be returned to Mr. Thorne immediately. Anna flinched at the word asset. She looked at Sam's sleeping face. To them, he was not a baby. He was a calf to be branded. The lawyer went on, painting a picture of Luke as a lawless drifter and Anna as a deceitful woman trying to escape her legal obligations. He used words like immoral and unstable, suggesting that a woman of her background was unfit to raise a child without the supervision of a benefactor like Cyrus. The townspeople nodded along. It was a story they understood. Debts had to be paid. Contracts had to be honored. Order had to be maintained. When it was Luke's turn, he stood up slowly. He did not have a lawyer. He held his hat in his hands, his knuckles rough and scarred. "Your Honor," Luke said. His voice was not smooth. It was deep, and carried to the back of the room without effort. "I am not a man of letters. I cannot argue with fancy words. But I know what I saw." He turned to look at the crowd, then back at the judge. "I saw a woman being sold in a yard behind a saloon like a broodmare. I saw men bidding on her like she was cattle. The man who sold her, Vance, held the paper this lawyer is waving around. If the paper was stolen, I did not know it. I paid $100. That is 2 years of savings for a man like me." He paused, looking at Cyrus. "But I did not buy her to own her. I bought her to get her off that stage. I bought her because the man bidding against me said he would dump the baby at an orphanage." A ripple of sound went through the room. A few women shifted in their seats. "I took her to my home," Luke continued. "I gave her a room. I gave her food. I have never asked for a cent of that money back, and I have never treated her as anything other than a free woman." He took a breath, and his voice grew harder. "This man talks about contracts. He talks about property, but he is talking about a human being. I consider Anna my wife. I consider that boy my son. We have built a home. If the law says that a piece of paper matters more than that, then the law is broken." He sat down. The silence in the room was different now. It was less judgmental, more thoughtful. The judge adjusted his spectacles. He looked at Anna. "Madam," the judge said, "you have heard the claims. Did you sign this contract?" Anna stood up. Her legs felt weak, shaking under the weight of her fear. She handed Sam to Luke, who took the baby gently. She walked to the front of the room. She felt small. She felt dirty. But then she looked at Luke. He nodded to her, a small, almost imperceptible motion. "You are iron," he had told her. Anna took a deep breath. She looked at the judge. "I signed it," she said. Her voice trembled, then steadied. "I was 16 years old. My father owed money. I did not know what I was signing. Cyrus told me it was for 1 year. She turned to look at Cyrus. He was smiling, a cold, predatory smirk. That smile ignited a spark of anger in her belly that burned away the shame. 1 year became 2, Anna said, her voice rising. 2 became 4. Every time I worked off $1, he added 2 more to the book. He charged me for the food I ate. He charged me for the clothes he made me wear. He told me I would never leave. She looked out at the faces of the townswomen, the ones who had whispered about her, the ones who had pulled their skirts away. "You call me a fallen woman," Anna said. "You whisper about where I came from, but none of you know what it is to be owned. None of you know what it takes to keep a baby alive when the world wants to crush you." She pointed a shaking finger at Cyrus. "He is not a businessman. He is a monster. He used me. He threatened to kill my father. And when I finally got away, when I finally found a place where I could sleep without a chair under the door, he comes here to drag me back." She turned back to the judge. "Luke has never forced me. He has never raised a hand to me. He gave me a coat when I was cold. He gave me a name when I had none. If you send me back to that man, you are not upholding the law. You are sentencing me to a living death." She stopped. The room was dead quiet. The lawyer from Denver looked uncomfortable. shuffling his papers. The townspeople were not whispering anymore. They were looking at Cyrus, seeing the cruelty behind the silk vest. Cyrus stood up. His face was red. The mask of the gentleman slipped. "She is lying," he shouted. "She is a whore. That is all she is. She was good for nothing but warming a bed, and she wasn't even good at that." The ugliness of the outburst shocked the room. The veneer of respectability shattered. Cyrus pointed at Luke. "And you? You think you can play house with my property? I will take her back and work her until she drops. And that brat, I will raise him to scrub floors like his mother." Luke moved. It was a reflex, a surge of protective violence. He started to rise, his hands curling into fists. His eyes locked on Cyrus's throat. Anna reached out and grabbed his arm. "No, Luke," she hissed. "Do not give him a reason." Luke froze. He looked at Anna, then at the judge. He slowly sank back into his seat, though his body vibrated with tension. Judge Miller looked at Cyrus with distaste. He looked at the lawyer, who was now staring at the floor. "Sit down, Mr. Thorne," the judge said sharply. Cyrus sat, smoothing his coat, muttering under his breath. The judge cleared his throat. He looked at the papers on his desk. He looked at Anna, standing proud and defiant in her faded dress. "This court recognizes the validity of written contracts," Miller said slowly. "The law is the backbone of civilization." Anna's heart sank. She felt Luke's hand tighten on her knee. However, the judge continued, raising his voice. "The law also recognizes the concept of unconscionable terms. A contract that creates a state of perpetual servitude, where the debt can never be repaid due to manipulation, is not a contract. It is bondage. And slavery was abolished in this country 20 years ago." He picked up the contract the lawyer had submitted. Furthermore, the behavior of the plaintiff in this courtroom demonstrates a lack of moral character that calls into question the safety of the woman and the child. He tore the paper in half. The sound was loud in the quiet room. "The claim of debt is dismissed. The contract is null and void." Cyrus jumped up. "You cannot do that. I have rights." "Sit down," Miller roared. "As for the child," the judge said, lowering his voice, "no child is property. The boy remains with his mother." He banged the gavel. Case closed. For a second, Anna couldn't breathe. The relief was so intense it felt like physical pain. She slumped against Luke, who let out a long, ragged breath. "We won," he whispered. "Anna, we won." But across the aisle, Cyrus was not looking at the judge. He was looking at Luke. His face was purple with rage, his eyes bulging. He grabbed his hat and stormed out of the courtroom, his hired men following close behind. The look he cast over his shoulder promised murder. Luke saw it. He stood up quickly. "We need to go," he said. "Now." They hurried out of the town hall. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still dark. The crowd was spilling out onto the street, buzzing with the drama of the verdict. Luke took Anna's elbow, guiding her quickly toward the livery stable where they had left the wagon. "He is not going to let this go," Luke muttered. "Keep Sam close." They reached the livery. It was a large, dark barn at the end of the street, smelling of hay and manure. The main doors were open. Their wagon was parked inside, near the rear stalls. Luke walked in first, his hand hovering near the colt on his hip. Anna followed, her eyes darting into the shadows. "Get in the wagon," Luke said. "I will hitch the team." He reached for the harness hanging on the wall. "You think a judge stops me?" The voice came from the shadows of a horse stall. Cyrus stepped out. He had taken off his fine coat. He held a heavy wooden club in his hand. Behind him, the two hired guns stepped out from behind a stack of hay bales. One of them held a knife that caught the dim light. Luke spun around, placing himself between the men and Anna. "It is over. Cyrus," Luke said calmly. "Go home." Cyrus laughed. "It is over when I say it is over. You stole from me. Cowboy, nobody steals from me." "Get him," Cyrus ordered. The two men rushed forward. Luke didn't wait. He drew his gun, but before he could level it, the man with the knife threw a heavy grain sack at him. Knocking his aim wide, Luke fired, the bullet burying itself in the dirt, and then the men were on him. It was a brutal, ugly scramble. The man with the knife slashed at Luke's arm. Cutting through the heavy coat, Luke slammed the butt of his pistol into the man's face, sending him reeling. But the second man tackled Luke around the waist, driving him back into the side of the wagon. Luke went down in the mud and straw. He kicked out, catching the man in the knee, but Cyrus stepped in and swung the club. It connected with Luke's shoulder with a sickening crack. Luke grunted in pain. Dropping his gun, he tried to rise, but the two hired men began to kick him, their heavy boots thudding into his ribs. "No!" Anna screamed. She was standing by the wagon wheel. She looked around frantically. She saw Luke curling into a ball to protect his head, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. Cyrus was raising the club for a killing blow to Luke's skull. Anna didn't think. She didn't freeze. She saw a long-handled shovel leaning against a post. She grabbed it. It was heavy, balanced for digging graves. She swung it with all the strength in her body. The flat of the metal blade hit the man with the knife square in the back of the head. He crumpled without a sound. Cyrus turned, stunned. He looked at Anna, his eyes wide. "You—" he started. Anna didn't stop. She swung the shovel again, screaming a wordless cry of rage. She missed Cyrus's head but caught him hard in the ribs. He howled in pain and stumbled back, dropping the club. The distraction was enough. Luke, seeing his opening, roared and surged up from the ground. He ignored the pain in his shoulder. He grabbed the remaining hired man by the throat and slammed him into the stall door with enough force to splinter the wood. The man slumped down, gasping for air. Luke turned to Cyrus. Cyrus was backing away, clutching his side, his face pale with shock. He looked at Luke, then at Anna, who stood there with the shovel raised like a Valkyrie, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing. Luke took a step forward. He was bleeding, covered in mud, his face a mask of cold fury. He picked up his gun from the straw. He cocked the hammer. "Get on your knees," Luke rasped. Cyrus fell to his knees in the dirt. "Please," he whimpered. "I will leave. I will go. Drop the gun. Luke!" The voice boomed from the doorway. It was the sheriff, accompanied by two deputies. They had their Winchesters raised. Luke didn't look away from Cyrus. He held the gun steady for a long heartbeat. The urge to pull the trigger was overwhelming. This man was a cancer. "Luke," Anna said softly. He looked at her. She lowered the shovel. She shook her head. "We are not them," her eyes said. Luke let out a breath. He slowly lowered the hammer and holstered the gun. "He attacked us," Luke said to the sheriff. "I saw enough," the sheriff said. Walking into the barn, he looked at the unconscious man, the groaning hired gun, and Cyrus cowering in the mud. He looked at Cyrus. "Mr. Thorne," the sheriff said coldly. "The judge ruled. You lost. Now I find you assaulting folks in my town. It was self-defense." Cyrus lied, scrambling up. "Shut your mouth," the sheriff said. "You and your men are leaving, right now. If I see you within 10 miles of Iron Creek after sunset, I will hang you for attempted murder. Do you understand?" Cyrus looked around. He saw the deputies. He saw Anna holding the shovel. He saw the cold promise of death in Luke's eyes. He spat on the ground. "This isn't over. It is for you," Luke said. Cyrus gathered his men, who were stumbling to their feet. He limped out of the barn, his fine suit ruined, his dignity shredded. He climbed into his carriage and whipped the horses, disappearing down the road without looking back. The silence returned to the barn. Luke turned to Anna. He swayed slightly, clutching his shoulder. Anna dropped the shovel and ran to him. "Luke!" She put her arms around him, holding him up. He was heavy, warm, and smelled of copper and sweat. "Are you okay?" she asked, frantically checking his head. "I am fine," he groaned. "Just a few bruises." He looked at her, and a slow, painful smile touched his split lip. "You hit him with a shovel," he rasped. "I would have hit him with the wagon if I could lift it," Anna said fiercely. Luke laughed, a sound that turned into a cough. He leaned his forehead against hers. "You saved me." "Anna," "We saved each other," she whispered. They walked out of the livery stable together, leading the horses. The sun had broken through the clouds. The street was bathed in a pale, golden light. A crowd had gathered near the entrance, drawn by the noise of the fight. They stood silently as Luke and Anna emerged. Luke was limping, blood on his face. Anna's dress was torn at the hem, her hands dirty, but they did not look like victims. They looked like victors. The shopkeeper, Mr. Henderson, was standing near the front. He looked at Luke, then at Anna. He took off his hat. He nodded to Anna. "Ma'am," he said. It was a small word, but it carried the weight of an apology. A woman standing nearby, the same one who had pulled her child away weeks ago, stepped forward. She held a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. She hesitated, then held it out to Anna. "It is just some dried apples," the woman said quietly. "For the boy." Anna looked at the woman. She saw the shame in the woman's eyes, and the offer of peace. She took the parcel. "Thank you," Anna said. She climbed into the wagon, her head high. Luke climbed up beside her, gritting his teeth against the pain in his ribs. He took the reins. "Let's go home," he said. As they rode out of town, the mud sucking at the wheels, Anna looked back one last time. Iron Creek was just a cluster of wooden buildings in the middle of a vast wilderness. It was a hard place. But as she felt the weight of the parcel in her lap and the warmth of Luke's shoulder against hers, she realized she was no longer afraid of it. She wasn't a stranger anymore. She wasn't a runaway. She was Anna, and she was going home. The journey back to the homestead was a quiet one, but it was a silence born of peace rather than terror. The wagon rattled over the uneven ground, the wheels kicking up the same dust that had coated their throats for months. Yet the air tasted different. It tasted clean. The high plains stretched out before them, vast and indifferent, a sea of golden grass bending under the relentless wind. The sky was a pale, hard blue, offering no apology for the storms it had sent or the drought that cracked the earth. The land did not care about human victories or defeats. It simply endured. But as the cabin came into view, standing solitary against the horizon, Anna felt a shift in her chest. For months, this structure had been a fortress, a place to hide, a shelter against the cold. Now, seeing the smoke drifting lazily from the chimney where the fire had banked down low, it looked like something else. It looked like a home. Luke pulled the horses to a halt near the porch. He climbed down, wincing slightly as his bruised ribs protested the movement, and walked around to lift Anna down. His hands on her waist were firm and lingering. He didn't scan the horizon for riders. He didn't check the load of the rifle. He just looked at her. "We are home," he said, his voice rough with fatigue but light with relief. Anna nodded. She adjusted Sam in her arms, the baby cooing softly at the cessation of the wagon's rocking. She walked up the steps and pushed open the door. The lock was still broken from the assault, a jagged reminder of the violence they had survived. But as they stepped inside, the shadows of the past seemed to retreat into the corners. They stood in the center of the room. The familiar scent of wood smoke, coffee, and sage greeted them. Anna looked at the table where they had shared meals, the pallet where Luke had slept alone, the cradle where Sam had grown strong. Luke closed the door behind them. He slid the heavy wooden bar into place, not frantically, but with a finality that echoed in the quiet room. It was the sound of a chapter ending. Cyrus was gone. The town had spoken. The judgment was over. He turned to her, taking off his hat and tossing it onto the peg. He looked at Sam, then at Anna. "I will start the fire," Luke said gently. "You rest." Anna sat in the rocking chair, loosening the blanket around Sam. She watched Luke kneel by the hearth, his broad back moving as he stoked the embers. She realized, with a sudden, overwhelming clarity, that she didn't have to be afraid anymore. The knot of tension that had lived in her stomach since she was 16 years old began to loosen, strand by strand. In the weeks that followed, the ranch fell into a rhythm of healing. The physical wounds were the first to fade. The purple bruising on Luke's shoulder turned to green and then yellow. Finally, disappearing altogether. The cut above his eye knit together, leaving a small white line to join the other maps of his history on his face. Anna's hands, calloused from the shovel and the reins, healed over, though she kept the strength she had found in the handle of that tool. The emotional wounds took longer, as they always do. There were nights when Anna still woke with a start, heart hammering, listening for the sound of boots on the porch. But on those nights, Luke was there. He would hear her gasp and be at her side in an instant, his hand warm on her shoulder, his voice a low rumble in the dark. "I am here," he would whisper. "The gate is shut. The world is outside." And slowly, the nightmares lost their teeth. Luke began to change as well. The stoic, silent cowboy who had brought her here out of duty began to soften. He was still a man of few words, but his actions spoke a language Anna was learning to read. He became openly affectionate, in small, careful ways. When he walked past her while she was kneading dough, his hand would brush the small of her back. When he left in the morning to check the fence line, he would pause at the door, wait for her to look up, and then kiss her forehead. A chaste, reverence-filled gesture that made her toes curl. They began to build a future, not just survive the present. The winter wheat needed to be planted, and the burnt-out building needed to be raised again. They worked side by side. Luke sawed the lumber, his shirt clinging to his back with sweat, while Anna hammered the nails, handing him tools before he even asked for them. They moved around each other with the easy grace of two people who knew the other's mind. "We need more stock," Luke said one evening over supper. "If the grass holds in the spring, we can support 20 more head." "We will buy them," Anna said confidently. "The garden will come in by then. I can sell the extra potatoes and carrots in town. It won't be much, but it will help with the feed." Luke smiled at her across the table. It was a full smile, one that reached his eyes and crinkled the corners. "You have a hand for the soil. Anna, I never thought anything could grow in that patch by the well." "I coaxed it," she said, returning his smile. "Things grow if you are patient with them." "Like us," Luke said softly. "Like us." She agreed. The greatest joy of those weeks was Sam. The boy was growing fast, fueled by milk and the love that filled the cabin. He pulled himself up on everything: the chair legs, the wood box, Luke's pant leg. One rainy afternoon, while Luke was mending a bridle by the fire and Anna was folding laundry, Sam let go of the bench. He stood there, swaying on his chubby legs, his eyes wide with concentration. "Luke!" Anna gasped. "Look!" Luke looked up. He froze, putting the leather down slowly. "Come on." "Sam," Luke whispered. "You can do it. Come to me." He held out his large hands. Sam grinned, showing his 4 teeth. He took a step, wobbling dangerously. Then another. He lurched forward, arms flailing, and fell into Luke's waiting grasp. Luke caught him, lifting him high into the air. "Did you see that?" Luke roared, laughing. "He walked! He is walking!" Sam shrieked with delight, grabbing Luke's ears. Anna ran over, hugging both of them. Luke wrapped one arm around her, pulling her into the celebration. They stood there, a tangle of laughter and limbs. And Anna knew that this specific moment of pure, unadulterated joy, was what she had fought for. As the season turned, the evenings grew longer and the firelight became a space of intimacy. They sat on the rug before the hearth, Sam asleep in his cradle. Luke would read aloud from one of his worn books, his voice steady and soothing, while Anna mended clothes or simply rested her head on his shoulder. The conversations shifted. They no longer spoke only of threats and survival. They teased each other. "You snore," Anna said one night, poking him in the ribs. "I do not," Luke protested, though he was grinning. "I breathe heavily. It is a sign of a clear conscience. It sounds like a bear stuck in a chimney." She laughed. "I will have you know that bear keeps the wolves away," he retorted, wrapping an arm around her waist and pulling her closer. The laughter would fade into silence, but it was a heavy, charged silence. Anna could feel the heat radiating from him. She could feel the way his thumb stroked her arm, an unconscious rhythm of desire. She saw the way he looked at her when the firelight caught her hair, a look of hunger that he carefully held in check. He was keeping his promise. He was waiting for her, and the waiting was becoming a sweet, agonizing torture. The night the dam finally broke was a Tuesday. The wind was humming softly through the dry grass outside, a lonely sound that made the warmth inside feel even more precious. The stars were out, cold and bright diamonds scattered across the black velvet of the prairie sky. Sam had gone down early, exhausted from a day of exploring his new walking skills. The cabin was quiet, save for the pop of the cedar log in the stove. Luke was standing by the window, looking out at the night. He seemed restless, his shoulders tight. Anna watched him from the table. She felt a pounding in her chest, a drumbeat of anticipation. She looked at her hands. They were steady. She looked at the bed in the corner. She looked at the man who had saved her life, honored her soul, and waited for her heart. She stood up. She walked across the room. The floorboards did not creak. She stopped behind him. "Luke," she said. He turned. His face was in shadow, but his eyes caught the firelight. "Yes?" Anna took a step closer. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. His skin was rough, calloused from years of hard labor, but his touch was electric. "The wind is cold tonight," she said. Luke nodded slowly, watching her face with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "It is. I don't want to be cold anymore," Anna whispered. She stepped in, closing the distance between them. She placed her other hand on his chest, right over his heart. She could feel it beating, a strong, steady rhythm that matched her own. Luke went very still. He looked down at her hand on his chest, then back up to her eyes. He searched her face, looking for any sign of fear, any sign of obligation. "Anna," he said, his voice a low rasp. "Are you sure?" He raised a hand and cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing her jawline. "You are safe here. You don't have to do this to keep me. You know that. I know." Anna said, her voice was clear and steady. "I am not doing this for you. Luke, I am doing it for me. I want to be your wife. In truth." She slid her hands up his chest, locking them behind his neck. She pulled him down slightly. "I am ready." Luke let out a breath that sounded like a prayer. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him. The contact was shocking in its heat. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, breathing in the scent of her skin. "Anna," he groaned. He kissed her then. It wasn't like the desperate kiss on the ridge, born of fear and adrenaline. This was slow. It was deep. It was a question and an answer, all at once. His lips moved over hers with a terrifying tenderness, tasting her, claiming her, worshipping her. They moved toward the bed without breaking the kiss. The room seemed to narrow down to the space between them. Luke slowed down. He undressed her with hands that shook slightly, not from nervousness, but from reverence. He treated each button like a revelation. When her dress fell to the floor, he looked at her in the dim light. He didn't look at the scars of her past or the thinness of her frame. He looked at her as if she were the first sunrise he had ever seen. "You are beautiful," he whispered. He undressed, revealing his own scars, the burn on his leg, the old bullet wound, the map of a hard life. Anna reached out and traced the scar on his jaw. She kissed it. "We are both broken," she whispered against his skin. "No," Luke said, pulling her down onto the quilt. "We are just mending." When their bodies finally came together, it was not an act of taking. It was an act of giving. It was slow and aching and sweet. Every touch was a promise. Every kiss was an apology for the years they had spent alone. Anna felt tears prick her eyes, not from pain, but from the overwhelming realization that this act, this thing that had been used as a weapon against her for so long, could be something so holy. It was healing. It was the final exorcism of Cyrus and the past. They moved together in the firelight, the wind singing outside, two lonely souls finally fusing into one. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, the fire burning down to glowing coals. The room was cooling, but under the heavy quilt, it was warm. Anna rested her head on Luke's chest, listening to his breathing slow. She felt a peace so profound it frightened her. She had never known peace. She had known relief and exhaustion, but never this deep, quiet settling of the soul. Luke tightened his arm around her. "Thank you," he whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Anna asked sleepily. "For trusting me? For seeing me?" Anna smiled against his skin. "You are hard to miss." "Cowboy," Luke chuckled, the vibration rumbling through his chest. He kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Anna." The words hung in the air. He had never said them before, not in those exact terms. Anna lifted her head. She looked at him. His eyes were open, watching her. "I love you too, Luke." It was the truth. It was the truest thing she had ever said. 3 days later, they rode into Iron Creek. The sun was shining, melting the last of the mud on the road. They were dressed in their best clothes. Anna wore a dress of pale yellow calico that Luke had helped her pick out from the catalog at the store. A dress that had never known the inside of a saloon. Luke wore a clean shirt and a new string tie. They went to the small white church at the end of the street. They had spoken to the preacher the day before. He was a stern man, the same one who had preached against Jezebels, but he had also seen the trial. He had seen the truth. The church was empty save for a few witnesses. Mr. Henderson, the shopkeeper, stood by the door, hat in hand. 2 women from the town, the ones who had offered the dried fruit, sat in the front pew. They walked down the aisle, Luke carrying Sam, who was babbling happily at the stained glass windows. They stood before the altar. The preacher opened his Bible. He looked at them over his spectacles. He hesitated for a moment, looking at Anna's face, scrubbed clean and shining with hope. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," the preacher said quietly, "and redemption is the cornerstone of our faith." He began the ceremony. It was simple. There were no grand speeches, just the old words, spoken in a dusty church on the edge of the wilderness. "Do you, Luke, take this woman?" "I do," Luke said. His voice rang out, strong and sure. "Do you, Anna, take this man?" "I do," Anna said. Luke slipped a plain gold band onto her finger. It wasn't expensive. He had traded a saddle for it. But to Anna, it weighed more than all the gold in the territory. It was a circle. It had no beginning and no end. "I pronounce you man and wife," the preacher said. Luke kissed her. It was a chaste kiss, suitable for a church, but his eyes promised more for later. As they turned to leave, the women in the front pew stood up. One of them stepped forward. She was an older woman with a face like a dried apple. "God bless you both," she said. She reached out and patted Anna's hand. "You have a good man there, and he has a strong woman." "Thank you," Anna said. She felt the sting of the old judgments, the whispers, the stares. But as she looked at the woman's face, she realized they didn't matter anymore. She wasn't defined by what they thought. She was defined by the ring on her finger and the man holding her arm. They walked out into the sunlight. The town of Iron Creek went about its business. A blacksmith hammered on an anvil. A dog barked. But for Luke and Anna, the world had changed. They were no longer outcasts. They were a family. That evening, back at the ranch, they celebrated. It was a quiet party. Luke roasted a chicken he'd killed that morning, and Anna made biscuits with the last of the white flour. They opened a jar of preserved peaches for dessert. Sam sat in his high chair, another creation of Luke's carpentry, banging a spoon on the tray. "More," he demanded, pointing at the peaches. Luke laughed and spooned another slice onto the boy's plate. "You have your mother's appetite for the sweet things. Son." "My mother says you spoil him," Anna teased. "He is the heir to the empire," Luke said, gesturing around the one-room cabin with a grand sweep of his hand. "He must be fed." They ate until they were full. They drank coffee by the fire. It was the most perfect meal Anna had ever eaten. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in violent streaks of crimson and violet, they went out onto the porch. The air was crisp, hinting at the winter that would soon return, but the cold didn't bite as deep as it used to. Luke sat on the bench, and Anna sat beside him. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her into his warmth. They watched the light fade from the land. The prairie turned purple, then gray, then black. "We will need to repair the south fence next week," Luke said quietly. "I know," Anna said, "and I want to expand the garden. I think we can grow corn on the east side if we irrigate." "Corn," Luke mused. "That is ambitious. We are ambitious people," Anna said. Luke chuckled. "That we are." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the coyotes sing to the moon. "Do you think about leaving?" Anna asked suddenly. "Do you ever wish for an easier life?" Luke looked at her. He shook his head slowly. "An easy life is just a life without struggle. Anna, it doesn't mean it is a life with love. I would rather fight the drought and the wind with you than live in a palace without you." He kissed her temple. "This is our kingdom. It is hard, but it is ours." Later that night, the cabin was dark and warm. Sam was asleep in his cradle, his breathing a soft rhythm in the quiet. The fire had burned down to a bed of glowing orange coals, casting a soft, pulsing light across the room. Anna and Luke sat on the rug before the hearth. Luke was leaning back against the wood box, his legs stretched out. Anna sat between his legs, her back resting against his chest. His arms were wrapped around her, his chin resting on her shoulder. They watched the fire. "I was thinking," Anna said softly. "About what?" Luke asked, his voice vibrating against her back. "About the spring." "The spring is a good time," Luke said. "Calving season." Anna took his hand. She guided it down to her belly. She pressed his palm against the fabric of her dress. I think there might be another calf coming in the spring," she whispered. Luke went rigid. His hand stilled on her stomach. "Anna," he breathed. "I am late," she said, "and I feel different, the same way I felt with Sam." Luke didn't speak for a long moment. Then he slowly turned her around so he could see her face. His eyes were wide, shining with moisture. "A baby? A baby." Anna smiled. Luke let out a laugh that sounded like a sob. He pulled her into a crushing hug, burying his face in her neck. "Another chance," he whispered. "Thank you, thank you." He pulled back and placed his hand on her belly again, this time with a terrified, joyful reverence. "I will build another room," he said, his mind already racing. "We will need more space, and I will get another cow. And—" "Hush," Anna said, placing a finger on his lips. "Just be happy. Luke, just be here." "I am here," he said. "I am always here, outside." The wind picked up. It howled around the corners of the cabin, scratching at the door like a wolf trying to get in. The drought was not over. The winter would be hard. There would be wolves and rustlers and sickness. The Wild West was a brutal, unforgiving place that swallowed the weak and broke the strong. But inside the cabin, the fire glowed. Inside, there was a man, a woman, and a child. Inside, there was a love that had walked through fire and come out clean on the other side. Luke kissed Anna, a slow, lingering seal on their promise. They were not broken. They were not property. They were a family. And as long as they had this warmth, this trust, this defiance, they could face any storm the sky decided to send. The fire popped, a bright spark flying up the chimney to join the stars. And in the heart of the vast, lonely American night, two people held each other and fell asleep, dreaming of the spring. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope Anna and Luke's journey touched your heart as much as it did mine. It's a reminder that even in the harshest landscapes, love can bloom if we are brave enough to fight for it. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment below telling me your country or city. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to the channel From Wild West. We have many more stories of the frontier, of romance, and of survival waiting for you. And please, share your thoughts on the ending in the comments in English. Did you like how they found their peace? Until next time, keep the fire burning.